Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us on the innovation stage. My name is Petra Clayton. I'm the creator and CEO of Custard, the hospitality marketing consultancy. I'm delighted you could all join us today because we're going to be talking a lot about how you know your customers, and I have got an exceptional panel with me today, and I'm going to ask them all to introduce themselves. I'm going to start with Noreen, who's to my left here.
Hello everyone, I'm Noreen, Director of Marketing for STR. So we do benchmarking for hotels, literally all around the world.
Vicky?
Hi, good afternoon everyone. I'm Vicky Murden, the Global Director of Marketing for Red Carnation Hotels.
And Raj?
Good afternoon, I'm Raj. I head up the Insights business in Barclays, looking after all of the data products that we provide to clients.
And Vibhu?
Hi, good afternoon. Vibhu Gand. I work for RBH Management as a Chief Information Officer and look after all things to do with guest data and systems.
Okay, so we've got everything covered here in terms of understanding your guest and, more importantly, how we collect, manage and utilize data. So I think just to kick off, what we want to understand is what is data, and it means different things to different people, and some of us will be thinking, oh, it's specifically demographics, other people might think insights and guides. So Noreen, you come at this from a different angle, don't you really? So talk to us, in your field, what is data?
Well, there's data all around me, basically, and with our company, we're looking at data from a performance perspective for the hotels, so your occupancy, your average daily rate, your RevPAR. But beyond that, we're looking at the whole hotel landscape from, how many rooms are opening, how many rooms are going to be opening. We also look at, the total landscape. The independent hotel space is so huge. There's so many individuals, independent companies all around the world. So it's really interesting to see. And it's also just great to be here as well. But so for me, the customer is actually all of you, like all the hotels. So it's slightly different from if you're a hotelier and looking at customers. But no matter what type of data you're looking at, you're going to be analyzing it in some shape or form.
And so, Vicky, you're sitting on a different side because, of course, you're utilising the internal data of the customer, but then you're also looking at insights. So talk to us what data kind of means to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think from my perspective and from a marketing perspective, it's about taking care of the guest through that whole guest journey, really. From the moment we interact with that guest before they've even booked and they may have found us on social media, to right when they check out, and those touch points throughout that journey, what we can learn about that guest, and then what we can follow up really from a retention point of view and onwards.
And Raj, we've talked previously, but in terms of data and how much of it there is available, it's quite important to set objectives and to understand where to get it. So do you think the hospitality, because obviously you look after and you see a different perspective, how good are we at hospitality at collecting, managing and analysing data?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we primarily we use a lot of our own data within Barclays to help businesses out in the market, and what we're doing is effectively turning that into insights that help businesses like yourselves. What we have noticed when we've stepped out, each of the different industries are at different maturity levels, and one of the key things for us is within hospitality, we've seen that some of the bigger players are very good at collecting and utilizing the data that they have in itself and are supplementing with external data like ours to kind of support them. But within the smaller frame or the smaller market of it, there's still a lot of evolution to go through to collect that data and mine it and use it in the right way for consumers and to benefit your businesses as a whole.
And Vibhu, Raj has just mentioned the volume of data. And from your perspective, do you feel we need to be collecting more data? Do you think we should just be streamlining a bit? There's some essential data we need to be looking at to start with, just to cover the basics.
So, hospitality industry and all of us as hoteliers or hotel operators have realized that we are of a habit of collecting a lot of data that we don't really utilize and mine it according to what our business needs are. So it's time to kind of streamline and get a transparent guest profiles across multiple systems with various channels that feed in to bookings, to guest profile, to Review Pro, to management portals. It's the ability to get to a single source of transparent guest data and use it meaningfully. So make it actually ethical in the ways we market to them, how we collect them, and get to a position where there's a lot of fragmented data sitting across various systems. and get to a position where we can actually be very transparent of what does that guest profile actually look like and what your model guest is. And that's where it really starts to drive value. It starts to drive that incremental revenue as well.
And it's interesting you say who the guest is now, and obviously we've been through a completely skewed period of time. How much should we be relying on the information that we've gathered over the last year and a half? Because of course some of us are probably seeing different kind of guests, different booking patterns, behaviours. Vicky, if I can start with you, how much are you relying on data, or are you going back now to 2019 data?
I think it's really important to, obviously with data, to never look at it in isolation, but actually it's really useful data right now because, as you said, the guest demographic has changed, and we're looking at domestic guests, whereas, you know, before it was probably for us more international travellers. So I think that's actually really useful data for us to hold on to. So as the international travellers start to return, we can use the domestic guest data to sort of model and attract more of those domestic guests as well as the international traveller, and that's a win-win situation, really.
And Vibhu, are you finding it easy to predict for the next year based on kind of, well, who is next year's customer, what are they going to want, or are you having to make some bold assumptions?
Well, the crystal ball is probably the most foggy as it's ever been. So when we look to the future, it's the return of the international tourists, it's the return of the international and local corporate as well. As Vicky rightly said, it's a lot about the local and domestic business at the moment. So when we're coming into prediction for next year and beyond, it's taking into equation how much of that local domestic business will stay and will further be supplemented by your international return.
And Noreen, you do have the crystal ball, surely, in terms that you're seeing and collecting data from right across the industry. Are you able to present and share the information that you're seeing in terms of how behaviours are changing going forward?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things that we're doing. I mean, we are looking at the 2019 data, but more as a benchmark to say, like, okay, this is where we want to get back to eventually. At what pace and when are we going to get back to that? It varies across different markets around the different world. But we're also looking at other statistics as well. So we're looking at, we've been doing some traveler surveys to say, okay, when is your intention to travel? Like, you know, we're saying, you know, when are you most likely to be traveling internationally, domestically, etc. So for the next year or two, it's definitely more domestic leisure. Then we're talking about domestic international. Then we're talking about domestic business. And then finally, we're talking about international business travel. So understanding the pace at which those intentions of travel are going to be coming back has a big influence on what we're trying to forecast as well. And then again, it depends on so many other factors. Government restrictions. Okay, from the 4th of October today, you don't have to do a test anymore to come back into the UK. Your day 2 test is now an antigen, not a PCR. So what are the other countries in the world going to be saying or changing the rules? And where is your guest coming from? So if, as Vicky was saying, right now it's more domestic, but once she starts focusing on the international travelers, understanding that market as well is going to be important.
And Raj, do you think that actually this has given us the shake-up we need to be able to use data more, that we should be looking at the external data, we should be looking at patterns, trends, behaviour, as Vicky said, never in isolation, but are we now going to have to be a bit more sophisticated about setting the right objectives and measuring correctly?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the key aspects of using data, and time and again we do this a lot with clients, is what are you looking to achieve? What are you looking to understand about your consumers, and how are you making sure that you're addressing your consumer needs? So ever more so, just using data and mining data, it's how useful is that data to you as a business. As an example, what we are seeing, some of the trends today in the market are just up to kind of the announcement of the government. We've seen a 33% uptick on international bookings already from our data, and equally a equal drop on the domestic side of the booking. So, but like we time and time have said, don't look at it in isolation. It's what have we learned over the pandemic, and what are we going to do to implement the strategies and track those strategies over the coming periods as we go along.
Okay, thank you. And Vibhu, you mentioned earlier, we're talking about Review Pro, there's lots of platforms. Vicky, you mentioned social media. Whose job is it, and have we got the resource in this industry? How often should we be really analysing that data? I mean, what's realistic for a hotel? If I can start with you, Vibhu.
Yep. So hospitality, we are as an industry, we are probably at the brink of that era to really mine our data, learn from our data, to have all the various commercial systems coming together, so that marketing. It's not only marketing's role. It's not only revenue management. It's not only sales, but it's the entire organization. And how do you take that guest data and actually drive additional revenue, drive tools and skills from it? So as a role, I think it needs to change from being department specific within hotels, within the management companies, within the brands, to actually be brand aligned and hotel aligned or industry aligned. That's where you really start to reap the benefit of it. Data nowadays for marketing purposes, you can literally have such a huge amount of data to cleanse through it and get to what your guest proposition is, to be ethical with it, to be inspiring, so that you're actually tackling the right information at the right time. And that's what the viewpoint is, to actually come to make that data work for the entire organization, may it be a single operator, single owner, or big brands. They all headed that way.
And Vicky, you must find that your role is very much about understanding your customer. So how do you manage this kind of the realm of opportunities to understand your customer? How are you managing it?
Hello?
Oh,
there we go. So I think, as hoteliers, we have to be realistic. We know that we have, often a PMS system here, we have a CRM system here. They're often not joined up, and we know that there are challenges there, but that, as you said, there are also a lot of ways of getting the data. For example, during the pandemic, we found that we started doing takeaways, and suddenly that was a whole new mine of information that we were getting about potential guests that we could start to market to. And then I think it's just about sort of collaboration across functions, really. So, you mentioned review management. That's not just the marketing team's responsibility or the hotel team's responsibility. It's about what can we do together to get that information and to sort of use it effectively.
And I'm assuming there are two objectives with every hotel: is retaining the guest and building that loyalty, but also recruiting emerging, particularly with the UK opening up. How do you budget for or plan for segmentation? Because we're segmenting and targeting, aren't we, very specifically. How much is that planned for and budgeted for? I mean, again, sorry, back to you, Vicky. Is that a challenge?
It is a real challenge, because it's kind of, as we said, that segmentation is changing all the time. But I think, if you take the domestic market, for example, we can sort of model the guests that we've got right now from a domestic point of view. We can go, right, these are the guests that we want, or these are the guests that we know love our brand. So how can we apply that to sort of a model of domestic guests potentially, to sort of advertise and retain across those channels?
And I'm sure this is a difficult one to answer, but I'll still ask it for all of you. But if a hotel came to you and said, what do we need to collect as a bare minimum in terms of data to really understand our guest and our future guests, so whether that's external reports as well, Vibhu, what would you say kind of the key things that you should be collecting at a minimum?
So as we are very much, the entire industry, as we are most focused on food and beverage and bedrooms, that's where what generates most of our revenue. Your postcodes and your email addresses are probably the basics that need to be obtained. That allows you to do a lot of mapping on which areas of the country produce the most revenue for your property or properties, and how do you actually engage with that in a more meaningful way? How do you make it more targeted? How do you obtain the best information set? So the basics would always be your spend, your demographic, and your location-based services. So that's what picks up the basic layer of the data and allows you to better market, to better understand where that revenue is coming from.
Raj, can I ask you the same question?
Tough to follow that. He's answered the question. So the key things that I would look out for, and this is more from a personal experience rather than from an industry perspective, but it's preferences. So knowing your customer is key and essential. So what are their preferences? What life stage are they? So if you're coming in as a family, there are key things that I would need as a family when I turn up at a hotel. So how do you kind of cater for those experiences? And equally, if you're modeling that out, as we mentioned, then that enables you to package up the right services, the right type of experiences for that group of customers in itself when they come to your resort or location.
Thank you. Vicky?
So, hello. So definitely location and preferences, 100% agree. And then I think the returning guests. So, you know, we're trying to do a lot of work at the moment around loyalty and how do we really thank the guests who've supported us throughout the past 18 months. So tracking them through that journey and whether they've stayed at one or more of our hotels, and then how do we reward that through a loyalty scheme.
Yeah, that's a good point. Noreen?
And I think everything that the panelists just said is absolutely right, but what I think is also critical here is that understanding, it's a bit of feedback. What are your objectives? Who are you targeting? What is your brand? Like the previous panel was just talking about that. Part of understanding who you're going after, then you know what data you're going to need to collect once you have your overall objective.
And we're talking about a lot of data here, a lot of analysis. Do we feel that paralyzes us in terms of innovation? Vicky, I know that's something you're quite passionate about, that we can over-analyze instead of using instinct and being authentic to our business?
Definitely, and I think, you know, as we move towards a world where there's so much more around privacy and we are going to lose that kind of tracking through cookies, etc., it is more about, you know, innovating and working out what works for you as a brand, really, because sometimes, you know, you might think that you're in the mind of the guests and you understand them, and actually then that stops you from making decisions that you would innately make as a marketer or a hotelier or, you know, a data analyst. So I think there can maybe be too much data sometimes. It's just what you do with it,
I guess that comes to
Noreen.
even looking at STR and looking at the data, you've got to understand how to interpret it, haven't you? Because you've got to make sure it's relevant to your hotel.
Absolutely. It can be overwhelming, and I completely understand. You're getting data from every angle. So I think it goes back to, okay, what are my objectives? What am I looking for? And then just taking the piecemeals out of it and choosing the right data that makes sense for you. And then the most important is, how are you going to utilize that data? How are you going to make a decision from that? How do you then interpret it and then apply it to your business as well?
And Vibhu, I mean, just on the same question to Vicky in terms of seeing innovation, I mean, we've got a lot in terms of self-service, kiosks, check-in. We're losing that ability to have the kind of general anecdotal conversation and feedback. Do you see that progressing, and that we will be more challenged by trying to get that data and that spur of the moment shift and agility that we need?
Yeah, so insights are very rare. You might have a lot of data at your hands, and you might kind of be even in today's world, you can be overloaded with spreadsheets, just the amount of information coming at you. To be truly inspirational, you need things like Review Pro, where you actually get direct guest feedback. That is essential because it allows you to really see your service from a guest perspective, whereas some data can be so clinical that the feedback is there, but it's truly clinical and you can't really do much with it. Whereas things like Review Pro, just your social media channels and feedback you're getting from the general marketplace, that's sometimes more invaluable because it's not clinical. It gives you some feel and it's tangible where your services can evolve, how you can make it more inspirational, and how you can make it more tangible so the guest actually interacts with that. And that, I think, is the kind of the slight cloud there that you might just get so overwhelmed with data that you're not really making meaningful changes to the business.
And I'm guessing part of that is also, if we look at retail as an example, personalization, making things very relevant, very timely. How much do we need to be producing more personalized marketing? I mean, Raj, what are your views on that? Personalization is what we've been told the last few years is very key to engagement and conversion. What are your views on that?
Definitely. I mean, personalization has been the key aspect of all kinds of marketing, and as Barclays ourselves, we are very focused on how do we personalize experiences that we give our consumers, whether they step into a branch or whether they're going onto our app, and all of those aspects of it, as well as the marketing. I think there is and particularly within retail, where a number of clients we work for, they do try to push towards a personalization angle, but there is a limit to the personalization. It's where do you step into the creepy versus where are you still in the kind of in the right, in the ethical space. So getting an email, for example, on an experience, getting an email as soon as you've kind of, for example, checked out and gone, we know you're in the hotel, here are the 5 things that you have to do now, basically, in the hotel, might be okay, depending on the context of how you've done it and where you've checked in. But if you've just spoken to the concierge and then getting that email, you may not appreciate it, because you kind of think they've collected some data, they've already told me, put it into a system, and the model spitted something out for me. So with all of these aspects and all of the experiences we give as businesses to our consumers, it's making sure that you put that ethical lens on, what am I doing, and would I feel creepy, would I feel creeped out if somebody did that to me in itself.
I think ethical is a really good word of the day, isn't it? It's about the legal boundaries, but also those ethical ones. I mean, Vicky, how creepy does it get? How personalised are you able to do, and where do you kind of draw the line? What's being really effective personalisation?
So I think in the luxury space it's a really tricky one, as you said, because our hoteliers are amazing. They do that actually in person, the personalisation. You know, a guest walks into the hotel, they know their name, they know what they like. Translating that to a digital space is quite tough, I think. But I think, you know, following up, even just a simple thing of using someone's name in an email, you know, just sometimes you do have to take it back to that simple point of using their name or using their location or using the fact that they have stayed with you before. It doesn't have to get too granular, I think.
Something I was listening to Revenue Hacks last week, and someone mentioned about targeting versus marketing. You know, you can avoid the targeting, but you can still do the marketing and still make it personal, like simple things like that. And I think it's such a challenge. Like, yes, we're here talking about data and customers, but I think, you know, when you go to a hotel, you know, any hotel, like, you want to have a good experience. You want the concierge to know your name. You may not want to get an email from the marketing team with the information that you've just checked in, but you want to make sure that that person remembers you, and then they'll have that wonderful experience with you throughout your stay.
And it's interesting, it's about those conversations on site. Now with brands, Vabu, in terms of what you can collect as a hotel, the brands or the OTAs might be collecting an awful lot of that data on your behalf. How do we kind of manage what we can collect on site to fully understand that customer?
So it's a very exciting time with OTAs and with the brands, because eventually all the data that is being collected is held by, under GDPR, how you share that data, how do you coexist in that space and service the guest. It's a very difficult question, and the way the industry is now starting to move is to try to get to that transparent stage where we are the ones as hoteliers servicing the guest, making that experience count, and making that service delivery part happen. No matter how good the brand is, how good the OTAs are, the delivery of that service is down to the operator, down to the hotelier. And it's a case of getting that data when the guest is on site and personalizing it for their experience. And I think what Vicky said about targeting and marketing, it's that combination. How do you market to them more effectively and use that data from your PMS, from your CRM, from the hotel systems that you have control of?
And part of collecting information and understanding your guests is also about looking at your future guests, which we talked about at the beginning. How much should we react to that changing customer as a hotelier? Because, of course, to make some of those changes can be very costly, big investment. And I spoke to a few people this morning actually saying, well, the guest I have now is not necessarily the guest I want to have. How agile and flexible, we are supposed to be marketing orientated, it's all about the guest and what the guest wants, that we're there to satisfy that need. How much, Vicky, I mean, particularly in your role, can we flex? Because we can see all of this, see all the reports, but then say, actually, we can't really do anything about it. We can't deliver this for you.
Yeah, and I think in a dream world, you would take those amazing guests that potentially are, you know, domestic guests, and go, this is a segment we really want, and then how can we model that to get more of those guests domestically as the international guest comes back? That's probably a little bit pie in the sky thinking, and isn't really going to happen. But I think there are definitely learnings that we can take from the last 18 months in terms of how our guest behaviour has changed, and you know, when you start to drill down into the specifics of each guest, there are things that you can take. For example, spend, certain locations, as I said before, loyalty, and have they stayed at more than one of our hotels. Those are the sorts of things that you can take and start to build that dream guest to then model and find more of, I think.
And Raj, are you seeing that in other sectors that are a little bit quicker maybe, or more agile because of the nature of that industry?
Definitely. So a number of things that we we work with a lot of clients to do is looking at the experiential kind of experience that you provide as a brand. So when you step into the hotel so for example, when you step into a particular supermarket or whatever, what are the other services you're consuming in and around that? So you could be doing laundry, you could pick up your keys, or you could pick up your parcels and everything like that. So what we're seeing is, how do people package up a service? And I've just given an example of supermarkets, but if you were thinking about your hotels, what are the things that consumers do? How do you partner with external organizations that could be complementary to what you're doing, and provide that experience for that customer as soon as they step through your doors, or as soon as they booked with you in itself?
And partnerships is a great way, isn't it, of understanding that customer. With STR, you must be seeing people reacting and responding to these changing trends. Is there any observations there?
Yeah, so I think with the data that we've been seeing throughout the pandemic, obviously we saw, you know, everything kind of fall, so many hotels close, you know, it's really, really heartbreaking to see. Now, of course, things are definitely picking back up, but as you know, everyone's been talking, it's been mostly domestic and not much business travel. But the other thing that we've also been noticing is that there's also an artificial cap happening at the moment, because hotels, restaurants, whatever, they cannot staff fully to what they used to be able to do in the past. So due to staff shortages, they're not able to be more than 70%, 60%, depending on, you know, your hotel, your property, and, you know, what your labor force is like. So we're seeing that happen. At the same time, we're also seeing, you know, inflated rates, because at some point, if your staff shortages, you're going to start raising your rates, you're going to start having to raise your costs, and then eventually your revenues are going to have to go up as well. So we're seeing some changes happening in the dynamics in terms of both occupancy and the average daily rate.
And you know, obviously this is very much about marketing, but we have all spoken as a panel about the importance of how data and the changing needs of the customer can help with your HR recruitment planning. Is that something that, Vibhu, that's something obviously you were looking at?
Yeah, I think it's industry-wide, it's sector-wide. We're all probably going through the perfect storm when it comes to resourcing. You're fighting with other sectors for the same level of resource. You're fighting with other industry, even internally you're fighting with other teams for that level of resource that you need to really drive the business. You know, the business might be coming back, and you know, there are examples where a hotel can only sell 60% of the inventory because physically there's not enough resource to service that model. And it's looking at the data and seeing where your big occupancies are, where your big business is, and staffing for those peak times to make the most revenue that you can in that time. And it's that challenge of how do you actually run your business, consume the data and resource for it, and still make a really decent profit at the bottom line.
Tough.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, panel. I think before we end, we have got time for some questions from the audience. Does anybody have a question? We do have a microphone at the back if you're keen to ask a question of our expert panel here. You've got lots of different experts. Yes, we've got a question just down here. If you could just say where you're from. Thank you. Oh, we can't hear you.
Bit closer.
There we go.
Hi, I'm Rosie from Stay the Night. We're actually a marketing agency as well. I just wanted to, we've spoke a bit about demographic data and the numbers, but one thing we're big with on our clients is the psychographic data, so how you get into the guest mindset. I think you mentioned it, Vicky, so I just wanted to know how you glean that information in terms of best practice.
Vicky, do you want to answer that?
It's a big question, really big question. But I think we haven't actually spoken about this yet today is using the various different platforms that I think are available to us. You know, we're talking about how big data can be sometimes, but actually sometimes it's about taking it down to that granular level. And I mentioned, you know, the takeaway platform that we've been using, or, you know, how guests make a reservation through a different platform. And I guess just sort of across all of those, finding out what it is that guests are sort of most requesting or asking. And sometimes it's not about the numbers, it's more about the semantics. So Vibhu, I know you mentioned online review platforms. Something that we've been doing recently is literally just taking a word cloud of the reviews that we've been getting and picking out those key themes and going, this is what our guests are saying about us right now, and from that then you can glean some really great insights, I think, as to what's going on in their minds.
Yeah, and it's that other level, isn't it? Vibhu, do you have anything to comment on that?
I think Vicky has probably put it the best as any one of us would. It's to get away from those numbers, because those numbers can become very overwhelming, and look at the actual emotional and the transactional response of that guest data. And it's more into the words than the numbers, and that's a balancing act. Pick up those keywords that actually propel you to either make a change for the better or propel you to change the service level and how you actually deliver it.
Great, thank you. Does that answer your question? Have we got any other questions in the audience? Yes, just one down here at the front. Thank you. If you just say where you're from.
Hi, I'm Swapnil from B3 Designers. We do interior design for hotels and restaurants. I guess my question is, and I used to work in hotels as well in the past, in marketing. How is the guest data that you're gathering, is it helping you inform your pricing strategy in any way? Is it helping you inform your hotel, your room costs? Are you able to use that data to upsell and get more revenue? Are you able to use that data to influence your revenue strategy in any way?
Are you seeing that, Noreen? You must be seeing some responses to that.
So I think what, as I was saying earlier, what we're seeing is that because depending on your hotel, your demographics have changed no matter where you are in the world. So I'll give an example in Thailand, which used to be a typically international market. You could charge a certain price. But now that you've suddenly switched to domestic market with not the same share of wallet, you then have to be able to then adjust accordingly. But at the same time, you have to think about what your brand is, what your offering is, and make sure that you don't give up on what you believe to be true. Because what we saw during the global financial crisis, when hotels dropped their rates, it took them nearly 10 years to come back up again. So it's really important to really think about what your rate strategy is going to be, how you're responding, but also we're all in a crisis at the moment. So you've got to do everything that you can do to keep your business running, to make sure you have, you can pay your staff, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really responding to what you're seeing in the market and what you're seeing and just what's happening around you. If the borders are closed, you're not going to be able to bring anyone in. So what are you going to do? Maybe you close a percentage of your hotel. Like, there are just so many things. It really depends from property to property what you're going to be doing.
Okay, does that answer your question? Just time for one more question, if we have any more. Yes, just this gentleman down here in front. She's just coming round the side.
Hi there, Gaurav from Nonius. We digitize the guest journey. My question is actually regarding what we do as well and impact on the hotel. So before COVID, view of having an app or digital journey was maybe, but now after the COVID, it has become a must. But it would be the first opportunity to hear from people from hotel sector as well, what they think on a level of yours, Vibhu, and Victoria as well.
Did you hear that?
No,
Can you
I
just repeat that last bit? Sorry,
So
just hold the microphone.
how essential is the digital journey in your view now for the guest? Because
How
all of the
essential is the
data and
digital
all that.
journey? Thank you. So the digital in terms, did you mention an app as well? Were you talking, no, anything, any digital, how essential is it now in part
Right,
of that?
okay. I mean, yeah, hugely important. I mean, really, that's been the only way of communicating with guests over the last 18 months, digitally, really. We've lost that personal interaction from hotelier to guest, which really drives the business. So for us, it's about has been about replicating that really lovely personal experience that our guests get in the hotel and translating that to the digital space. And I think, we've done a huge amount of work around that in the last 18 months. And actually, that's a really nice learning to take, to continue that, I think. And then in conjunction with everything that, the amazing experiences that our hotels offer, if we can nail the two and offer both, then I think, we'll come out of this in a really strong position.
Thank you. I think that's a great comment to end on, is we are about amazing experiences, and that is why we're in the hotel industry. So thank you so much to our panel Very insightful. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you for joining us today. And please enjoy the rest of the show. Thank you.